You didn't wake up one morning and decide to change. That's not how it happens. It happens in the middle of a Tuesday, in a conversation that suddenly feels hollow, in a silence that used to feel comfortable and now feels suffocating. Something shifted, and you couldn't put it back the way it was. Most people call it a crisis, a phase. You're just going through something. But you already know it's not that. Because the things that used to fill you, the noise, the plans, the roles you played for other people, they stopped working. Not gradually, abruptly, like a drug that stopped producing its effect. And now you're standing in front of a life that looks exactly like it did before. Except you can no longer pretend you don't see what's underneath it. What we're going to talk about in this video isn't spiritual growth as a destination. It's spiritual growth as a stripping away. A slow, often painful process of losing things you were convinced you needed and discovering that their absence doesn't destroy you. It frees you. These are the 7 things that people who go through genuine psychological and spiritual transformation quietly walk away from. Not because they're strong, but because holding on finally became more painful than letting go. Topic 1. The need to explain themselves to everyone. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly justifying your choices to people who never asked to understand you. They asked to approve you. And for years, maybe your entire life, you've been giving those justifications. Explaining why you left that job, why you ended that relationship, why you moved, why you didn't move, why you chose that path, why you abandoned the other one. You've been submitting your life for review. Notice what happens in your body when you make a decision that matters to you. The decision itself might feel clear, but within seconds, your mind starts rehearsing how you'll explain it to your mother, your friends, your former colleagues. You haven't even acted yet, and you're already in defense mode. That's not caution, that's conditioning. Otto wrote about the way human beings split themselves between the fear of life and the fear of death. But there's a third fear that operates silently underneath both. The fear of disapproval, of being seen as wrong, of having your choices examined and found lacking. And this fear doesn't protect you from anything. It just keeps you in a constant state of psychological trial, where you are always both the accused and the one begging for acquittal. People who go through genuine awakening stop explaining themselves, not because they become cold or arrogant, but because they realize something quietly devastating. Most of the people demanding explanations will never actually be satisfied by them. You can explain until your throat goes dry, and the person who needed to control you through your guilt will simply find a new angle. The explanation was never the point. The submission was. This doesn't happen overnight. You start small. You make a choice and you don't announce it. You sit with the discomfort of not defending it. And slowly, very slowly, you notice that the ceiling doesn't fall. The people who truly care about you don't need a trial. And the ones who do? You begin to see them differently. What would you do differently this week if you weren't mentally rehearsing how to explain it to someone? Topic 2. Relationships built on mutual performance. You've been in conversations where both people are performing. You know this. You can feel the specific weight of a relationship where you're not actually talking to each other. You're presenting versions of yourselves and watching to see if the other person applauds. It's exhausting in a way that's hard to name, because from the outside it looks like connection. But inside, you always leave feeling slightly more alone than when you arrived. This is what psychology calls the persona, the constructed self that we offer the world in place of the real one. Carl Jung described it as a mask, but what Rank understood more deeply is that the mask isn't just protection, it's a negotiation. You show people a version of yourself that you believe they can accept, and in return, they stay. The problem is that what stays isn't you. It's the performance, and you are left alone inside it. Think about a friendship you've maintained for years, primarily out of history. You've known this person since before. Before you changed, before something cracked open in you, before you started asking the kinds of questions that make people uncomfortable at dinner parties. You love them, in some sense. But you've noticed that when you're together, you edit yourself. You avoid certain topics. You perform a version of yourself that fits the container of that relationship, because the real version would break it. That editing has a cost. Every time you choose the performance over the truth, you deposit a small amount of resentment at yourself, at the relationship, at the unspoken agreement between you. Over time, that deposit becomes a wall. And one day you realize you're not close to this person at all. You've simply been doing a very convincing impression of closeness for a very long time. Awakened people don't become hermits. They don't cut everyone off in a dramatic gesture. What they do is subtler and more painful. They stop performing, and they watch what remains. Some relationships survive the honesty. Most don't. Not because the other person is bad, but because the relationship was always between two masks, and removing yours dissolves the entire architecture. Who are you performing for right now? And what would happen if you stopped? Topic 3. The constant consumption of noise. There is a version of silence that most people never reach because they've engineered their lives to prevent it. The moment you finish one thing, the phone is already in your hand. The moment you sit with nothing to do, something starts playing. The commute, the shower, the 10 minutes before sleep, all of it filled. Not because you're busy, because the alternative is worse. The alternative is yourself. This isn't a judgment. It's an observation that should make you uncomfortable, because it's operating in you right now, possibly even as you watch this. The question isn't whether you consume noise. The question is, what are you preventing yourself from hearing when you do? Rank described what he called the life fear, the anxiety that arises not from death, but from the full weight of living, from truly inhabiting your own consciousness without the buffer of distraction. The noise isn't entertainment, it's anesthesia, and like all anesthesia, it works. It numbs exactly what it's supposed to numb, but it also numbs everything else. Your clarity, your instincts, the quiet knowledge that something in your life needs to change, that you can't afford to hear right now. People in genuine transformation don't give up their phones in some performative detox. What changes is their relationship to silence. Silence stops being something to escape and becomes something to enter. Not because it's comfortable, it isn't. The first layers of silence are full of anxiety, unprocessed thought, the echo of everything you've been avoiding. But underneath that, something else. Something that doesn't have a name but feels, for the first time in a long time, like yours. You know the difference between rest and avoidance. You can feel it in your body. Rest replenishes you. Avoidance leaves you more depleted than before, with the faint shame of knowing you chose it deliberately. When was the last time you sat in genuine silence? Not meditating, not journaling, not doing anything productive with the quiet. Just letting yourself exist without a soundtrack. Topic 4. The identity built from other people's expectations. At some point, likely very early, you learned what kind of person was safe to be. Not in an explicit lesson, but in the thousand small signals of approval and withdrawal that shaped you before you had language for any of it. You learned that certain feelings made people uncomfortable, that certain ambitions were acceptable and others weren't. That being a specific kind of person, responsible, agreeable, successful in a recognizable way, kept the people around you from pulling away. And so you became that person. You were very good at it. So good, in fact, that at some point the performance stopped feeling like a performance and started feeling like you. This is the most insidious thing about the false self. It doesn't feel false. It feels like identity. The ambitions you inherited don't announce themselves as borrowed. The beliefs you absorbed don't arrive labeled "not yours." They simply become the furniture of your psyche, present so long that you stop seeing them as choices and start experiencing them as facts. The moment of crack, which is what some people call awakening and others call breakdown, and the difference is mostly in how much support you have, is the moment you notice the furniture. You look at the career you're building and feel nothing. You look at the relationship you're maintaining and feel the specific emptiness of having done everything right and arrived nowhere that matters. You look at the person you've been being and you realize with a cold clarity that you've been living someone else's answer to a question they never bothered to ask you. Reclaiming your own identity is not a triumphant process. It's more like an archaeological dig through your own psychology. You sift through belief after belief, asking not, "Is this true?" but "Is this mine?" And many things you find, maybe most things, weren't chosen. They were inherited, absorbed, agreed to before you were old enough to negotiate. The people who go through this process don't emerge with a new identity fully formed. They emerge with something more unsettling and more real. An openness, a willingness to not know who they are for a while, in exchange for the possibility of eventually finding out. What do you believe about yourself that you've never actually questioned? Topic 5. Guilt as a lifestyle. There is a particular type of person, and you may recognize yourself here, who carries guilt the way others carry keys, automatically, reflexively, without examining whether the guilt is earned or simply inherited. You feel guilty for resting when others are working, guilty for saying no, guilty for wanting things that are only for you, guilty sometimes for simply taking up space. This kind of guilt has nothing to do with conscience. Conscience is the capacity to feel genuine remorse when you've acted against your own values. What we're talking about is something different, a chronic, ambient guilt that has been installed in you to make you easier to manage. Guilt keeps you small. Guilt keeps you accommodating. Guilt keeps you available in ways that benefit everyone except you. Rank understood the way that guilt functions as a social mechanism, a way of ensuring that the individual doesn't stray too far from the expectations of the group. But the group's needs and your needs are not the same thing. They never were. The guilt you carry for taking up space, for living differently, for making choices that don't center everyone else's comfort, that guilt is not yours. It was given to you, and you've been maintaining it faithfully. The process of releasing this kind of guilt is not painless. It feels, at first, like recklessness, like selfishness, like becoming someone you were warned against being. Because the people who installed the guilt in you, most of them doing so without any conscious malice, simply passing on what was passed to them, will not celebrate your liberation from it. They will call it coldness, ego, ingratitude, and you will have to sit with that, with the gap between who you're becoming and who they need you to be. That gap is real. It costs something, but it costs less, considerably less, than spending another decade being governed by a guilt that was never based on anything you actually did wrong. So topic 6. The belief that anxiety means something is wrong here is what no one tells you about anxiety. In a person who is genuinely awake to their own life, anxiety is not a malfunction, it is a signal. It is the organism telling you that you are at an edge, at the border between the self you've constructed and something larger, truer, more demanding. Most people respond to that signal by retreating, by making themselves smaller, safer, more manageable, by choosing the familiar over the unknown, not because the familiar is good, but because the anxiety attached to the unknown feels like proof that the unknown will destroy them. It won't, but I understand why it feels that way. Rank wrote about the neurotic as someone who suffers from consciousness, who feels the full weight of their own freedom and cannot bear it. The person who goes through awakening is not someone who has conquered this anxiety. They're someone who has learned to move through it rather than around it. The anxiety doesn't disappear, but its meaning changes. It stops being a stop sign and starts being a compass. Think about the last significant thing you did that genuinely stretched you, the conversation you finally had, the decision that changed your direction, the moment you said what you actually thought instead of what would keep the peace. Was there anxiety before it? Almost certainly. And what happened after? The anxiety that lives at the edge of your real choices, the ones that matter, the ones that are actually yours. That anxiety is the cost of being alive in a real way. It is the feeling of your freedom pressing against you. Most people spend their lives designing elaborate systems to never feel it. And in not feeling it, they never move. They stay in the center of a very safe, very suffocating life, wondering why nothing ever changes. What are you avoiding right now because the anxiety around it feels like a warning? What if it's an invitation? Topic 7. The pursuit of a life that looks right from the outside. Somewhere along the way, you absorbed a blueprint, a picture of what a successful, meaningful, admirable life was supposed to look like. And you've been, consciously or not, building toward that picture. The right relationship, the right career, the right address, the right body, the right narrative for when people ask how you're doing. The cruelest part of this is that the blueprint often works. You achieve the things on it. You stand inside the life you were supposed to want, and then you wait for the feeling that was supposed to arrive. The satisfaction, the completion, the sense that you have finally become the person you were trying to be. It doesn't come. Or it comes briefly, a flash of something like joy, and then disappears, leaving behind a quiet that is somehow worse than the striving was. Because now you can't tell yourself it's coming. You're already here. And here doesn't feel like anywhere. This is what some spiritual traditions call the dark night of the soul. What psychologists might call existential disillusionment. What Rank understood as the inevitable confrontation with the gap between the constructed self and the authentic one. You've built a life that satisfies the part of you that needed external validation. And in doing so, you've starved the part of you that needed something entirely different. Something that couldn't be photographed or explained at a dinner party or put on a resume. The people who wake up through this confrontation don't necessarily dismantle the external life. Sometimes they do. Sometimes the marriage ends, The career changes, the geography shifts. But often the change is interior and therefore invisible to everyone around them. They stop building for the photograph. They start building towards something that has no image, only a feeling of rightness that they've learned, slowly and painfully, to trust over the opinion of any audience. The audience never had any skin in your life. Only you do. None of this resolves cleanly. That's the part no one warns you about. You don't arrive at a place of permanent clarity where the old fears stop visiting and the new self stands fully formed and unmistakable. What actually happens is quieter and stranger. You become someone who can hold the discomfort without running from it. Who can sit with the unresolved? Who can look at the life you've been given and the life you've been building and tell the truth about which parts are yours and which parts belong to someone else's idea of you? The abandonment of these 7 things isn't liberation in the cinematic sense. It's more like putting down a weight you've been carrying so long you forgot it wasn't part of your body. And for a moment, the lightness is so unfamiliar it almost feels like loss. Almost, but not quite.